They shoved me into the chair, yanking the ropes so tight around my wrists that they cut into my skin. A wave of panic surged in my chest as my eyes met Jessica's. She stood there, watching with this unnerving calm, almost like she was enjoying it. "Not just one time," she murmured, her voice dripping with satisfaction as she motioned toward the men standing behind her. The air grew heavier with their presence, like a noose tightening around my neck. 10 times with them. 10 of them. Her words hit me like a punch, and as much as it hurt, a part of me relished the pain. But in the end, it was they who lost everything. But let me backtrack a bit. I was sitting on the couch, still trying to wrap my head around Jessica's sudden suggestion. The TV was humming in the background, but my thoughts were racing. Lately, something had been off with her. I couldn't put my finger on it exactly, but I knew something wasn't right. "The cabin in the woods?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "That's quite the drive. Are you sure about this?" Jessica's smile didn't falter, but there was a sharpness in her eyes that unsettled me. "Absolutely. It'll be good for us, don't you think? Just the 3 of us, getting away from everything." I glanced over at Josh, who was practically bouncing with excitement. His eyes were wide, filled with hope, which stood in stark contrast to the stress I'd noticed in him lately. Seeing how much this meant to him tugged at my heart. "Please, Dad," he begged again. "We haven't gone anywhere in forever." I felt torn. On one hand, the thought of being stuck in a remote cabin with Jessica, given her recent behavior, made me anxious. But on the other hand, seeing Josh so excited, it had been a long time since I'd seen him like that. "Well," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully, "I guess we could use a break from the usual routine. When were you thinking, Jess?" "This weekend," she replied quickly. "Maybe a little too quickly. I've already checked, and there's a spot available. We just need to say yes." I raised an eyebrow. "You've already looked into it?" She gave a little shrug, though something about the gesture felt rehearsed. "I had a hunch you'd both be on board. So, what do you say?" Josh was looking at me with so much hope in his eyes, and I felt the pressure of the decision bearing down on me. Something about all of this didn't sit right with me, but I couldn't quite figure out what it was. Was I just being overly suspicious, or was my gut telling me something I wasn't picking up on? "Okay," I said, against my better instincts. "Let's do it. A family getaway might actually be good for us." The words felt strange in my mouth, but the way Josh's face lit up almost made it worth it. Almost. As Jessica started going over the details of the trip, I still couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something crucial. But for now, all I could do was hope that this weekend would bring us closer together instead of pulling us further apart. The next morning, we loaded up the car and hit the road. The highway eventually gave way to winding paths through thick forests, with tall trees casting long shadows over the narrow, twisting road. I kept my eyes on the asphalt, though I couldn't resist sneaking glances at Jessica. She seemed oddly giddy, like there was an energy buzzing just beneath her skin. "Why this sudden need for a getaway?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual even though my unease was growing stronger. Jessica turned to me, her smile wide but her gaze distant. "We just need a break," she said softly, almost dismissively. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as we continued down the increasingly deserted road. Something felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what exactly it was. The silence in the car felt heavy, broken only by Josh's occasional bursts of excitement from the back seat. "You doing all right back there, buddy?" I called out, welcoming the distraction. "Yeah, Dad. Do you think we'll see any bears?" I chuckled nervously, trying to lighten the mood. "Let's hope we don't run into any bears, buddy. We'll stick with the friendlier animals." Jessica's phone buzzed, and she quickly grabbed it, her movements sharp. I caught a quick glance at the screen. Someone named Aaron had sent her a message. She turned the phone away from me, fingers flying across the screen as she typed out a response. "Work stuff?" I asked, doing my best to sound casual. "Yeah," she muttered, barely glancing up. A knot tightened in my gut. Jessica hadn't been working for months. Who in the world was Aaron? We drove on, the dense forest creeping closer as the road turned rougher and narrower. The isolation was suffocating. Jessica's leg bounced impatiently, and she kept glancing at her phone like she was waiting for something. How much further? I asked, my voice strained, even to my own ears. Not much longer now, she replied, her voice almost too cheerful. Just follow the GPS. I glanced at the navigation screen. We were well off the beaten path now, the little icon representing our car blinking alone in an endless sea of green. Jess, you sure about this place? I asked, my unease growing. Feels pretty isolated. She turned to me, her blue eyes flashing with something I couldn't quite read. That's the whole point, Nick. We're supposed to be getting away from everything. The way she said it sent a chill crawling up my spine. What exactly were we escaping from? And why did I have this sinking feeling that nothing would be the same after this trip? As I stepped out of the car, the lodge towered before us, a massive structure that seemed to blend into the darkening forest. Josh was already bounding up to the front, excitement bubbling out of him. This place is awesome, he shouted, his eyes wide with awe. But the unease that had been nagging at me all day only deepened. Something was seriously off, and the sight of the lodge didn't help. Its weathered wood and darkened windows gave the whole place an eerie vibe. This place feels off, I mumbled under my breath, not expecting anyone to hear. Jessica's grin only widened. It's perfect, she said with a strange enthusiasm, taking Josh by the hand and pulling him inside. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to turn around, get in the car, and drive away. But I couldn't leave Josh. Reluctantly, I followed them into the lodge. Inside, the atmosphere was just as unsettling. The air was thick with a musty smell, and every step we took made the old floorboards groan beneath us. The living room was big, but bare, dominated by a massive stone fireplace that took up an entire wall. Let's check out the bedrooms, Jessica said, her voice overly chipper, like she was trying too hard to sound excited. As we climbed the creaky stairs, I saw her sneak a glance at her phone again. She tucked it away quickly when she noticed me looking, but not before I caught sight of a few unread messages. Everything okay? I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Of course, she replied, flashing me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Why wouldn't it be? Josh was already running ahead of us, flinging open doors and peeking into each room. This one's mine, he yelled, claiming the biggest bedroom for himself. I followed him in, grateful for the brief distraction. You definitely scored the best room, buddy, I said, tousling his hair. As Josh explored his new space, I looked back at Jessica. She was still in the hallway, her phone out again, typing away furiously. The knot in my stomach twisted even tighter. Jess, I began, but she cut me off before I could finish. I'm going to check out the kitchen, she said suddenly, spinning on her heel and heading back down the stairs. I stood there, torn between following her and staying with Josh. Something was seriously wrong, but I couldn't figure out exactly what. The whole situation felt like it was teetering on the edge of disaster, just waiting for the right spark to set it off. I was still standing there, frozen, when I heard the front door creak open behind us. My heart dropped as 10 men filed into the room, their expressions hard and unreadable. The air seemed to thicken, becoming heavy and stifling. What's going on? I managed to get out, but the question died in my throat the moment I saw Jessica's face. There was something in her eyes, something dark and unfamiliar, a look I'd never seen before. She turned to Josh, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Josh, why don't you check out the game room down the hall and put on your favorite headphones? Josh hesitated, his eyes darting between us, sensing the tension. I wanted to tell him to stay, to not leave my side, but before I could get the words out, he nodded and disappeared down the hallway. I whipped back to Jessica, my heart pounding in my chest. Jessica, what the hell is going on? Before I could make sense of it all, rough hands seized me from behind. I fought back, twisting and pulling, but it was no use. What the? Let go of me. They shoved me into a chair, binding my wrists so tightly that the ropes bit into my skin. Panic gripped me as I looked up at Jessica. She was standing there with a strange calmness, almost as if she was enjoying the whole thing. Jessica, stop this. I yelled, fear and confusion making my voice waver. She stepped closer, kneeling down until her face was right in front of mine, her eyes locking onto mine. But the woman staring back at me was a stranger. "Nick," she whispered softly, her voice laced with something cold and unsettling. "There's something you need to see." I struggled against the ropes, my mind racing a mile a minute. "What are you talking about? Untie me right now." Jessica stood slowly, a small, twisted smile tugging at her lips. She walked over to one of the men, leaning in to whisper something in his ear. He nodded and left the room. "You know, Nick," she said, pacing back and forth in front of me, "I've been planning this for a long time. You have no idea how exhausting it's been pretending like everything was normal." I stared at her, a mixture of disbelief and dread swirling inside me. "Pretending? Jessica, what are you talking about?" She let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Oh, don't play dumb. You seriously never noticed how miserable I was? How trapped I felt in our so-called perfect life?" The man returned, holding a laptop. He placed it on the table in front of me, positioning the screen so I had a clear view. Jessica's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "You always wanted honesty in our relationship, didn't you, Nick? Well, here it is." She pressed play, and my world crumbled. Video after video rolled across the screen. Jessica with different men, in hotel rooms, in our house, even at my office. The timestamps on the videos went back months, even years. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. This couldn't be happening. "Stop," I choked out, my voice barely holding together. "Please stop." Jessica paused the video, leaning in close, her face just inches from mine. "What's the matter, Nick? I thought you wanted the truth." "Why?" I managed to croak out, my voice nothing more than a whisper. "Why are you doing this?" She straightened, her eyes colder than I'd ever seen them. "Because I was bored, Nick. Because you were too weak, too passive. I needed more. I craved excitement, passion, things you could never give me. I felt like I was drowning, struggling to make sense of it all. But what about Josh? What about our son?" For a split second, I saw something flash in her eyes, maybe doubt, maybe regret, but it vanished almost immediately. "Josh will be fine," she said dismissively. "He'll understand when he's older." Anger surged through me, cutting through the haze of shock. "Understand? Are you out of your mind? You've scarred our child for life." Jessica's expression hardened. "Don't you dare judge me. You have no clue what I've been through, how long I felt like a prisoner in this marriage." I shook my head, trying to keep my voice steady. "If you were that unhappy, we could have talked about it. We could have gone to counseling, or even gotten a divorce. But this is beyond cruel, Jessica. It's twisted." She laughed bitterly, the sound grating against my nerves. "Oh, give me a break. Like you'd ever agree to a divorce. You're too scared of change, too stuck in your safe little routine. This was the only way to wake you up." "Wake me up to what?" I shot back, my anger boiling over. "That you're willing to betray me in the worst way possible? That you'd throw away our family just to satisfy your selfish needs?" Jessica's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Watch it, Nick. You're not in any position to be throwing accusations around." I glanced around at the men surrounding us, their expressions blank, unreadable. "And who are they? Your lovers?" Jessica gave a casual shrug. "Some of them, yes. The others? Friends who understand my situation. They're here to make sure everything goes smoothly." A cold shiver ran down my spine. "What plan, Jessica? What are you about to do?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Don't worry, Nick. You'll find out soon enough." "What are you talking about?" My voice cracked, tangled up in the confusion swirling in my head. Jessica leaned in close, so close I could smell the faint trace of her perfume. Sweet, but now it made me feel sick. The smile she wore wasn't the one I had fallen in love with all those years ago. This one was sharp, cruel, like it was carved out of stone. "I've been with these 10 men," she said, almost gleefully, her eyes lighting up with a twisted satisfaction. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I couldn't find my footing, my brain struggling to process her words, to grasp the nightmare that was unfolding before me. "You cheated?" The word barely crawled out of my mouth, scraping at my throat. This was so much worse than I'd ever imagined. Jessica nodded slowly, deliberately, taking her time, relishing the pain she was causing me with each confession. Not just once, she purred, gesturing to the men standing behind her. Their presence felt like a noose tightening around my neck. 10 times with them. Her words cut straight through me, and she seemed to savor every bit of my torment. My entire world shifted on a dangerous axis. How could she do this? How could the woman I married, the mother of my child, gloat about something so monstrous? Why? I barely managed to get the word out, my voice nothing more than a weak whisper amidst the storm of emotions crashing inside me. Why are you doing this? Her expression darkened, turning to stone, her gaze hard and unrelenting. Because, she hissed, her voice dripping with venom, I want you to understand what you made me crave. I recoiled, horrified by the gleam in her eyes. This wasn't the woman I knew. Maybe I never really knew her at all. None of it made sense. I couldn't wrap my head around why she was doing this, turning her twisted desire into a weapon aimed straight at me. Before I could say anything more, she jerked her head toward the group of men like some twisted conductor orchestrating a grotesque symphony. With one simple command, she set everything in motion. Show him. The men didn't hesitate. They moved in, circling her like predators closing in on their prey. Each step calculated, their intentions chillingly clear. My stomach twisted, a sickening dread tightening inside me as I watched, completely helpless. No, Jessica, I shouted, but my voice sounded distant, swallowed up by the suffocating tension in the room. I was powerless, bound to the chair, my arms pulling against the ropes, unable to do anything to stop what was coming. Please, don't do this. But she didn't even glance my way. None of them did. They began, each movement slow, deliberate, meant to make sure I didn't miss a second of the nightmare unfolding in front of me. My breath caught in my throat, sharp and ragged, as I watched them touch her, their hands roaming over her like she was some kind of prize, something to be claimed rather than a person. Her eyes remained locked on mine, defiant, unflinching. There was something twisted in her gaze, something that chilled me to the core. There was no remorse there, no second thoughts, only cold, calculated satisfaction. This is what I wanted, Nick, she murmured, her voice low, thick with something dark and twisted, something that sliced through my helplessness like a knife. Each word was a dagger, driving deeper into me, carving away everything I thought I knew about our marriage. This is what you made me crave. The room closed in around me, my vision narrowing, focused solely on the horrifying spectacle in front of me. My mind couldn't process the enormity of her betrayal, the sheer depravity of what I was witnessing. They didn't stop. They kept touching her, their hands rough, possessive, treating her like she was nothing more than an object for their amusement. And she let them. She welcomed it. Jessica, no. My voice cracked, barely more than a broken whisper, lost in the wreckage of my collapsing world. I stared in disbelief as Josh's small frame appeared in the doorway. My heart shattered into a million pieces. This couldn't be happening, not to him, not to my boy. Mom? Dad? His voice was so small, trembling with fear. I wanted to shield him, to protect him from this nightmare, but I was bound, helpless, unable to move. Josh, no. I screamed, my voice straining with desperation. I thrashed wildly against the ropes, desperate to reach him, to cover his eyes, to stop him from seeing this horror. But I was powerless. I couldn't protect him. Jessica's head whipped around toward Josh, her expression faltering for the briefest moment before she quickly regained control. Josh, go back to your room, she shouted, her voice high-pitched, almost frantic. But Josh didn't move. He stood there frozen, his eyes wide with shock and terror as he took in the scene in front of him. I could see the confusion, the fear, and the pain in his eyes as they darted between Jessica, the men, and me. Mom, what are you doing? He asked, his voice quivering with disbelief. Tears began to roll down his cheeks, and I felt my own eyes burn, fighting back tears I could barely hold in. Jessica's face flickered with panic for a brief moment, but then it hardened again. Josh, go back to your room, she repeated. But this time there was a hint of desperation creeping into her voice. Josh shook his head, his small body trembling. You told me Dad was bad. You said he hurt you, he sobbed, his voice cracking with anguish. My heart broke all over again. The lies she had fed him, the poison she had poured into our son. It was unbearable. Josh, it's not true. I called out, my voice raw, thick with emotion. Your mom, she's lying to you. Josh took a step back, clearly overwhelmed, his eyes wide with disbelief. He looked between Jessica and me, trying to make sense of it all. Why, Mom? Why are you doing this? He cried, his voice filled with a kind of pain no child should ever have to feel. Jessica's face twisted in frustration, her carefully controlled mask beginning to slip. Josh, you don't understand, she yelled, her voice cracking under the weight of the situation. But it was too late. Josh turned and ran, his footsteps echoing down the hallway as he fled. Josh, wait! I shouted after him, my heart breaking for my son, now carrying a burden no child should ever bear. Jessica stepped in front of me, her face twisted in rage. Look what you've done, she hissed at me, though I could see the fear creeping into her eyes. Her carefully crafted plan was unraveling. No, Jessica, I said, my voice steady despite the storm of terror and fury coursing through me. This is all on you. I expected her to chase after Josh, to try and fix the situation, but what happened next filled me with a new kind of horror. Instead of going after our son, she turned back to the men, her face tightening with determination. It was as if nothing had happened, as if our little boy hadn't just witnessed this nightmare. Where were we? She asked, her voice eerily calm, as if she could just carry on like nothing had changed. The men exchanged uncertain glances, clearly unsure of what to do next. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Our son, our innocent boy, had just fled in terror, and Jessica was acting like it didn't matter. The depth of her cruelty hit me like a physical blow. Jessica, what the hell are you doing? I growled, pulling against my restraints. Our son just saw everything. Go after him. He needs us. She turned to face me, her eyes cold and distant. He'll be fine. He's in his room. We'll deal with him later. I felt sick. This woman, I didn't recognize her anymore. How could she be so heartless about our own child? You're insane, I spat, my voice trembling with fury and disbelief. He's our son, Jessica. He's traumatized. How can you just stand there and— Shut up, she snapped, her composure cracking once again. Just shut up, Nick. You don't get to judge me. You don't get to tell me how to handle this. I shook my head, feeling a mix of disgust and pity. Handle this? There's no handling this, Jessica. You've destroyed everything. Our marriage, our family, our son's innocence. And for what? For this sick game? She laughed, a hollow, bitter sound that sent a chill down my spine. A game? You think this is a game? This is my life. Nick, this is what I want, what I need. Something you could never understand or give me. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw a stranger. The woman I had loved, the mother of my child, was gone. In her place stood someone I didn't recognize, someone capable of unimaginable cruelty. What about Josh? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. What about his needs, his safety, his happiness? For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, maybe regret, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that same cold, detached look. Josh will understand when he's older, she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. He'll see that I did what I had to do to be happy. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The selfishness, the utter disregard for our child's well-being. It was beyond anything I could have imagined. You're wrong, I said firmly, despite the fear and anger coursing through me. He'll never understand this, Jessica. You've scarred him for life. And for what? Your own selfish desires? She turned away from me, back to the men who still stood there, looking uncomfortable. Enough talking, she said coldly. Let's get on with it. As she moved closer to the men, a surge of determination ignited inside me. I had to get out of here. I had to find Josh, to comfort him, to shield him from this madness. I began to struggle against the ropes with renewed energy, ignoring the pain as they dug deeper into my skin. Jessica, I called out, one last desperate attempt to reach whatever humanity might be left in her. Think about what you're doing. Think about Josh. It's not too late to stop this. But she didn't even glance my way. It was as if I no longer existed, as if our son's suffering meant nothing to her. And in that moment, I knew the woman I had loved was truly gone. As I watched her with these men, my mind raced. How could I break free? How could I find Josh? What kind of damage had already been done to him? The thought of him alone, confused and terrified, tore at my heart. I had to be strong for him. I had to find a way out of this nightmare. While Jessica and the men carried on like nothing had happened, I silently vowed to my son that I would make this right. Somehow, someway, I would get us out of this. But for now, I was trapped, forced to endure this horrific spectacle while Josh was somewhere in this godforsaken lodge, scared and alone. The helplessness weighed heavily on me, but I pushed it down. I had to stay sharp, to wait for any chance to escape. As I looked at Jessica, filled with disgust and disbelief, one question kept haunting me. How did we end up here? How did the woman I loved turn into this monster? And more importantly, how was I going to save our son from the devastation she had caused? I stood there, trembling from the shock of it all. The men acted like animals, completely detached from reality. I don't know how much time passed, but suddenly the wail of sirens cut through the chaos, growing louder with every second. I saw the color drain from Jessica's face. No, no, she muttered, panic creeping into her voice. This wasn't supposed to happen. The men, who had seemed so confident just moments ago, exchanged nervous glances. I heard one of them whisper, "The cops." A wave of hope surged through me. Josh must have found help somehow. My brave, smart boy. Relief washed over me, though the dread and disgust still churned inside. Suddenly, the door flew open, and several police officers stormed in, guns drawn, shouting commands. The men immediately backed away, their hands raised in surrender. Jessica stood frozen, caught between shock and fury, as the reality of the situation finally hit her. "You ruined everything," she screamed at me, her face twisted with fury, her voice dripping with venom. The officers moved in quickly, restraining Jessica and the men. I felt the ropes around my wrists loosen as an officer carefully cut me free. My arms dropped to my sides, trembling uncontrollably, my entire body shaking with the aftermath. "Josh!" I cried out, my voice cracking under the weight of my desperation. "Josh!" And then I saw him. My son stepped cautiously back into the room, clutching a phone tightly in his small hands. Without thinking, I rushed to him, pulling him into my arms and holding him as close as I could. "It's okay, buddy," I whispered, my voice trembling with emotion. "I'm here now. You're safe." Josh clung to me, his body racked with sobs. I held him tighter, a surge of relief and heartbreak washing over me all at once. "I'm so sorry, Josh," I murmured, my voice thick with guilt. "I'm so sorry you had to see any of that. You did the right thing, calling the cops." Josh looked up at me, his tear-streaked face a mixture of fear and relief. "I was scared, Dad," he whimpered, "but I remembered what you told me about emergencies." I kissed the top of his head, my own tears flowing freely now. "You were so brave, son. So incredibly brave." An officer approached us, his expression kind and understanding. "Sir, we'll need your statement, and it's a good idea to have the boy checked out by the paramedics, just to be sure." I nodded, still holding Josh close. "Of course. Can I stay with him?" "Absolutely," the officer reassured me. "We'll make this as smooth as possible for both of you." As we made our way outside, I caught a glimpse of Jessica being led toward a police car, her hands cuffed behind her back. Our eyes met for a split second, and I saw something flicker across her face. Regret? Anger? I wasn't sure, but I looked away quickly, focusing instead on Josh. The paramedics were gentle with him, asking him questions while they checked him over. I stayed close, holding his hand, trying to give him any comfort I could. "You're doing great, buddy," I told him, squeezing his hand softly. I'm so proud of you. As the night wore on, we gave our statements to the police. I tried to shield Josh from the worst of it, but I knew he had seen far too much already. The weight of everything that had happened, how our lives had been turned upside down in just a few hours, pressed heavily on me. But as I looked at Josh, seeing the strength and resilience in his eyes, I knew we'd get through this. It wouldn't be easy, but we had each other, and for now, that was enough. I held Josh close, my arms wrapped protectively around him, as we watched the police lead Jessica and those men out of the lodge. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed in my ears, the surreal soundtrack to this nightmare. An officer approached us, his expression calm and professional. "Sir, we'll need you and your son to come with us to the station, for your safety and to help us piece together what happened," he explained. I nodded, feeling like I'd aged 10 years in just one night. "Of course, whatever you need." Josh looked up at me, his wide eyes filled with fear and confusion. "Dad, do we have to go?" "Yeah, buddy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady for his sake. "The police need our help to figure all this out. But don't worry, I'm not leaving your side." The ride to the station was quiet, the weight of the night hanging heavy. Josh clung to me, his little body trembling against mine. I stroked his hair gently, whispering reassurances I wasn't sure I even believed myself. At the station, they led us into a small room with a couch and some chairs. An officer, Jones according to his badge, sat across from us, ready to help us through the next steps. "Mr. Taylor," Officer Jones began, his tone soft and understanding, "I know this is difficult, but can you walk me through what happened today?" I took a deep breath and glanced at Josh. "Is there somewhere my son can wait? I don't want him to have to hear this all over again." Officer Jones nodded. "Of course. We have a child advocacy specialist who can sit with him in another room, if that's okay with both of you." Josh's grip on my arm tightened. "I don't want to leave you, Dad." I knelt down to meet his eyes. "It's all right, buddy. I promise I'm not going anywhere. The police just need to ask me some grown-up questions. How about you go with the nice lady and draw some pictures? I'm sure they've got some cool crayons here." Josh hesitated for a moment, then nodded. A kind-faced woman appeared and gently took him by the hand, leading him out. As I watched him walk away, it felt like a piece of my heart was being carried with him. Once the door closed behind them, I turned back to Officer Jones. "Where do I even start?" I asked, my voice faltering. "Just tell me what happened when you arrived at the lodge," he encouraged. So I did. I went through every agonizing detail, Jessica's strange behavior, the men showing up, the videos she forced me to watch, the way she seemed to take pride in my humiliation. With every word, the weight on my chest grew heavier. "And then Josh walked in," I said, my hands balling into fists at the memory. He saw, God, he saw things no child should ever have to see. His own mother. I couldn't finish the thought. Officer Jones handed me a tissue, and I realized then that I was crying. "Mr. Taylor," he said kindly, "I can't imagine how hard this is, but you need to know that both you and your son are safe now. We're going to do everything we can to help you through this." I nodded, trying to pull myself together. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Well, we'll need formal statements from you and Josh," he explained. "There will be an investigation, and this will most likely go to trial. But right now, our priority is making sure you and your son are safe and getting the support you need." As Officer Jones outlined the next steps, my mind drifted to Josh. How was I going to help him cope with this? How could I shield him from the trauma he'd just witnessed? I sat there in the dimly lit police station, my mind still reeling from the events of the last few days. Officer Jones leaned forward, his face full of concern. "Mr. Taylor, I know this is overwhelming, but we need to revisit some details. Can you tell me more about Jessica's behavior leading up to all of this?" I took another deep breath, trying to steady myself. She'd been acting strange for weeks, always on her phone, being secretive. I thought maybe she was just stressed out from work, but my voice trailed off as the memories came flooding back. "And the videos she showed you at the lodge?" Officer Jones asked gently. My stomach twisted at the thought. They were explicit, her with different men. She looked proud of it, like she was showing off. Officer Jones nodded, scribbling down notes. And Josh? You said he walked in on what was happening? The image of my son's scared, confused face flashed in my mind. I clenched my fists, trying to hold back more tears. Yeah, he saw things no kid should ever have to see. Jessica didn't even care. She just told him to leave. We'll make sure Josh gets all the help he needs, Officer Jones reassured me. Child Services is already involved, and we have excellent child psychologists on standby. I nodded, appreciating his understanding. As I left the station, my phone buzzed. It was my lawyer, Sarah. Nick, I've got some news. The prosecutor is moving forward with charges against Jessica and those men. It's a long list: child endangerment, emotional abuse, public indecency, conspiracy. They're not taking this lightly. Good, I said, my voice firm. What's our next step? We need to file for divorce and push for full custody. After what happened, we've got a strong case. Can you come by the office tomorrow? The next day, I sat in Sarah's office, surrounded by stacks of legal documents. She walked me through our strategy, explaining how we'd use the evidence from the lodge to argue for full custody of Josh. Nick, I won't sugarcoat this. It's going to be a tough fight. Divorce and custody battles are never easy, and with the criminal charges involved, it's going to get even messier. But given what Jessica did, we're in a strong position. I nodded, my emotions a whirlwind. Anger at Jessica for what she'd done, fear for Josh's future, and a fierce determination to protect him. What about Josh? I asked, my voice tight. How do we keep him safe during all this? Sarah's expression softened. We'll request a temporary restraining order to keep Jessica away from both of you. We'll also work closely with child psychologists to make sure Josh's emotional well-being is prioritized throughout the process. The next few weeks blurred by in a haze of meetings, paperwork, and endless discussions with lawyers and psychologists. The child psychologists explained the potential long-term effects of what Josh had been through. Their words scared me, but they also offered hope, giving me tools to help him heal. Through it all, Josh stuck to me like glue. He had nightmares, waking up crying and calling for me. I'd rush to his side, holding him tight and whispering that he was safe, that no one would ever hurt him again. One night, as I tucked him into bed, Josh looked up at me with those big, questioning eyes. Dad, is Mom ever coming back? My heart sank. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that his mother had betrayed him in the worst way imaginable? I sat down on the edge of his bed, taking a deep breath as I chose my words carefully. Josh, your mom, she made some really bad choices. Choices that hurt both of us. Right now, it's not safe for her to be around. I don't know if that's ever going to change. He nodded slowly, his little face scrunched in thought. I'm scared, Dad. What if she tries to take me away? I pulled him close, hugging him tightly. That's not going to happen, buddy. I promise. I'm going to do everything I can to keep you safe. As the custody hearing drew closer, my anxiety hit new heights. Sarah had prepared me as much as possible, but nothing could fully brace me for the moment I'd face Jessica in court. The day of the hearing finally arrived. I sat in the courtroom, my palms sweaty as I gripped the edge of my seat. Josh sat beside me, looking small and nervous in his dress shirt and tie. When Jessica entered with her lawyer, our eyes met for just a second. I searched her face for any sign of regret, for a glimpse of the woman I thought I'd married, but all I saw was cold defiance. The hearing began, and Sarah presented our case with fierce determination. She outlined the events at the lodge, supported by police reports and psychologist evaluations. Jessica's lawyer tried to argue that she had acted out of emotional distress, but even he seemed to know it was a weak defense. As the judge called for a recess to deliberate, I turned to Josh. You doing okay, buddy? He nodded, though his face was pale. I'm okay, Dad, as long as you're here. His words gave me strength. No matter what happened, I knew we would face it together. When the judge returned, the courtroom fell into a heavy silence. My heart pounded as she began to speak. In light of the evidence presented, particularly the severe emotional and psychological harm inflicted upon the child, this court finds it in the best interest of Joshua Taylor to award full custody to his father, Nicholas Taylor. I exhaled sharply, feeling tears of relief sting my eyes. I squeezed Josh's hand, and he looked up at me with a small, hopeful smile. The judge continued. Visitation rights for the mother, Jessica Taylor, are suspended indefinitely pending further evaluation and completion of court-mandated therapy. As we walked out of the courtroom, I felt a weight finally lift from my shoulders. The road ahead would still be long and difficult, but for the first time since that horrific day at the lodge, I felt hope. Josh and I would heal together. It wouldn't be easy, but we had each other, and for now, that was enough. Months had passed since that terrible night, but the memories still lingered, haunting me. Josh held tightly to my hand, his presence both a comfort and a reminder of why we were here. We stood in the courtroom once again, my heart pounding as the judge prepared to deliver the final sentence. The judge's voice cut through the tense silence. Jessica Taylor, you have been found guilty on all charges. A wave of emotions surged through me. Relief, anger, sadness. Jessica, the woman I once loved, the mother of my child, sat there without expression as her fate was sealed. For your heinous actions and the severe psychological damage inflicted upon your child, I sentence you to 10 years in prison, the judge continued. I heard Josh's sharp intake of breath beside me. I squeezed his hand gently, trying to offer him any comfort I could. The judge wasn't done. Additionally, you will be required to undergo extensive psychological evaluation and treatment as a condition for any potential parole. I couldn't help but think it was too little, too late. The damage was already done. The judge then addressed the men involved. Each of you will serve between 5 to 8 years, depending on your level of involvement and prior criminal records. The emotional harm inflicted on a child who witnessed such acts is incalculable, she added. As I listened, a sense of grim satisfaction settled over me. Justice was being served. Those who had torn our lives apart were going to face the consequences. It wouldn't undo the trauma, but at least it was something. I glanced down at Josh. His face was a mix of confusion and relief. We still had a long road ahead of us, but at least this chapter was coming to a close. The people who had hurt us were going to be locked away, and we could finally focus on healing. As the courtroom began to empty, I knelt down to Josh's level. It's over, buddy. They can't hurt us anymore. He nodded, his eyes filling with tears. I pulled him into a tight hug, feeling his small body tremble with silent sobs. We stayed like that for what felt like forever, father and son, survivors of a nightmare we never asked for. A year had passed since that awful day at the lodge, and while the memories still lingered, they no longer held the same power over us. Josh and I had come a long way. Watching him play in the yard with his new friend, Ethan, filled my heart with joy. The sound of their laughter echoed through the air, a stark contrast to the quiet, withdrawn boy he had been just months ago. Our weekly therapy sessions had been tough, but they were paying off. Josh was slowly finding himself again. I never thought we'd get to a place like this, I admitted to Claire, who sat beside me. She gently squeezed my hand. Neither did I, but here we are, she said softly. Claire had been an unexpected blessing in our lives. We had met through a support group for single parents, and her kindness and understanding had drawn me in. She had gone through her own struggles and knew the delicate balance between healing and moving forward. Josh came running up to us, his face flushed with excitement. Look, Dad, Ethan and I built a fort. My heart swelled with pride and love. That's amazing, buddy, I said, pulling Claire closer as I watched the boys. I'm so proud of you. As I stood there, watching Josh and Ethan play, I reflected on how far we had come. The nightmares that once haunted Josh had become less frequent. He was more open now, more willing to talk about his feelings. His therapist often marveled at his resilience, calling him a brave little boy who had faced something incredibly difficult and was coming out stronger on the other side. I had been working on myself too. The guilt I carried for what Josh had gone through had been crushing at first, but through therapy, I learned to forgive myself. I realized that I had done everything I could to protect him. Now, my focus was on rebuilding our lives and finding joy in the moments we shared. Our new routine had brought a sense of stability back into our lives. I returned to work, and Josh was thriving in school. We spent our evenings together, sometimes just the two of us, and other times with Claire and Ethan. It felt good to have a support system, to know that we weren't alone in this journey. I woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside the window, the soft glow of the morning light filtering through the curtains. For a moment, I just lay there, soaking in the warmth of Claire beside me and the peaceful quiet of the house. It was hard to believe that 3 years had passed since those dark days that had turned our lives upside down. I turned my head to look at Claire, still sleeping peacefully. Her presence in our lives had been nothing short of a blessing. I remembered the day we first met at one of Josh's therapy sessions. She was there with Ethan, and something just clicked between us. It wasn't love at first sight. We were both too hurt for that, but there was an understanding, a connection that deepened over time. I heard the soft patter of footsteps in the hallway and couldn't help but smile. The door creaked open, and Josh poked his head in, his hair sticking up in all directions. "Dad, are you awake?" he whispered. "Yeah, buddy, come on in," I replied softly, careful not to wake Claire. Josh climbed into the bed, snuggling up next to me. At 11 years old, he was growing up so fast, but moments like these reminded me that he was still my little boy. "Is it really happening today?" he asked, his eyes wide with excitement. I nodded, feeling a mix of joy and nerves. "Yep, it's wedding day." Josh grinned, then glanced over at Claire. "Should we wake her up?" Before I could respond, Claire stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She took in the sight of us and smiled. "Good morning, my boys." Just then, Ethan appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "Is it time to get up?" Claire laughed softly. "Looks like the whole gang's here. Come on, Ethan, join the party." Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled onto the bed, wedging himself between Josh and Claire. For a few precious moments, we lay there together, a tangle of arms, sleepy smiles, and warmth. As I looked at the faces of my soon-to-be wife and our boys, a wave of gratitude washed over me. We had all been through so much, and now, here we were, about to start a new chapter. The rest of the morning was a whirlwind of activity. There were suits to put on, hair to comb, and last-minute details to finalize. Josh and Ethan were buzzing with excitement, racing around the house in their matching suits. Before I knew it, we were standing in the garden, surrounded by our closest friends and family. The flowers were in full bloom, their vibrant colors contrasting beautifully against the lush green of the grass. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. Josh tugged at my sleeve. "Dad, you okay?" I looked down at him, my heart swelling with pride. He had come such a long way from the scared little boy who had witnessed things no child should ever see. "I'm great, buddy. Just a little nervous." He grinned up at me, his eyes full of reassurance. "Don't worry, Dad. Claire loves you, and so do we." I pulled him into a tight hug, blinking back tears. "I love you too, Josh. So much." The soft strains of music began to play, and everyone turned to look down the aisle. There she was, Claire. She walked toward me, a vision in white, her eyes locked on mine. In that moment, the world faded away. It was just the two of us. When she reached me, I took her hand, feeling its warmth and the strength behind it. The officiant started speaking, but I barely registered the words. I was lost in Claire's gaze, in the love shining back at me. We exchanged our vows, promises of love, support, and understanding. When the time came for the rings, Josh and Ethan stepped forward, each holding a small velvet box. The pride on their faces as they handed us the rings brought tears to my eyes. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant said. "You may kiss the bride." I pulled Claire close, and our lips met in a kiss that felt like coming home. The garden erupted in cheers and applause, with Josh and Ethan's excited shouts rising above the rest. As we turned to face our guests, hand in hand, I caught Josh's eye. He was beaming, his face filled with pure happiness. In that moment, I knew we had made it. We had found our way out of the darkness and into the light. The reception was a whirlwind of laughter, dancing, and heartfelt toasts. I watched as Josh and Ethan ran around with the other kids, their joy infectious. Claire squeezed my hand, and I turned to her, feeling overwhelmed with gratitude. "We did it," she whispered, her eyes full of love. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. "We did. Thank you for everything." She leaned in and kissed me, and once again, I was struck by how incredibly lucky I was. How lucky we all were. As the night wound down, I found myself sitting with Josh and Ethan. Both boys were tired, but still buzzing with excitement. "So, what do you think?" I asked, smiling at them. "Good day." Josh nodded eagerly. "The best, Dad. I'm really happy for you and Claire." Ethan grinned. "Yeah, it was awesome. And now we're officially brothers." I ruffled their hair, feeling an overwhelming surge of love for these two boys who had been through so much. That's right. We're a family now. All of us. As I looked around at the remnants of our celebration, Claire chatting with a few guests, Josh and Ethan leaning against each other, half asleep, I felt a deep sense of peace. We had built something beautiful here, something worth protecting every single day. The past had shaped us, but it no longer defined us. We were moving forward, together, stronger than ever. And I couldn't wait to see what the future had in store for our little family.